So, what are the next variants that might take over the world? Can we predict what is the future of the pandemic? This is one of the favorite topics I like to investigate, and this is, of course, what we're going to be talking about today. My name is Dr. Mikola Rashek of Genomics, and let's get started. There's one group of scientists that we absolutely love to follow, and the reason why is because they use computational modeling to thus far, they have used it to successfully predict the last three major waves of Omicron. So they were able to predict that BA.1 version of Omicron would take over the world. And then they were able to predict that BA.2 variant of Omicron would take over the world. And then they followed that up with a third successful prediction that BA.4 and 5 variants would take over the world. So they about a month and a half ago, unfortunately I missed it. I like to look at their data once in a while, but I didn't catch it right in time. About a month and a half ago, they published another paper making another set of predictions, which is what we want to be able to tell you about. I apologize about the crampons noise. We're in a tight canyon space, but definitely worth looking at this beautiful frozen canyon, right? Check it out. So let's see if I can moonwalk my way backwards a little bit. So first of all, what's causing evolution of the virus? Clearly, there's a natural selection that is causing how the virus is evolving. And the very first time these authors mentioned the very first pressure, immunological pressure on the virus was causing the virus to evolve to become more infectious. And that was the first purpose why the virus was evolving. However, they were mentioning, I believe they might have been the very first ones to bring this up and mention this in the world. Just making sure mic is on. and in about halfway through 2021, or in the later half 2021, they mentioned that the virus started to evolve to start dodging the neutralizing antibodies. So by then, the majority of the Western world was already vaccinated, and the virus shifted in its evolution to start evolving in order to dodge as many neutralizing antibodies that we as a population were producing in order to attack the virus. And as I mentioned, as far as I understand, they might have been the very first people to actually bring up this concept to our attention. I could be wrong, but they're the first ones I'm aware of, so that's where I'm going with, okay? And clearly, the antibodies, what this means is that the antibodies to some degree are shaping the evolution of the virus. Now, that first prediction, that information, they were able to make that analysis based on looking at over 2 million different genome sequences of viruses. Now, for the latest information that they were bringing up as to what could be driving the evolution of the virus, they looked at more than 3.5 million different genome sequences of SARS-CoV-2 viruses. That's how many full genome sequences of viruses from all over the world, viruses that have been isolated from patient samples. And so we have a very, very clear picture of how the virus is evolving. And what these guys are doing is they do computational modeling. So they look at basically, I'm in the ice hole. They basically look at how the mutations that they're discovering, they can model them on the surface of the spike protein, and you can then model the surface of the spike protein of the virus itself onto the surface of the ACE2 receptor. And you can actually model energetically whether these mutations are making the interaction with the ACE2 receptor better or worse. And of course, the better that interaction is, the more likely that the virus will become more infectious. The other modeling they also analyze is they also look at how these mutations in the spike proteins that are constantly evolving, how are they affecting the interaction with the variety of different antibodies. And of course, now here we're looking for reverse purpose. The worse that interaction is, the better for the virus, because basically what the virus is achieving is is it's dodging the antibodies from those antibodies being able to neutralize it. So, and they for the latest prediction, as I mentioned, they looked at 3.5 million different genome sequences, and they map variety of these, and they looked at which variants which variants could be the best in terms of their interaction with the ACE2 receptor and best at dodging the neutralizing antibodies. And they were able to come up with new variants, and these variants are, this is from memory, they mentioned BQ.1.1, okay, and BA.2.75, and its subvariants, 0.2, and also another one with another mutation. And they mentioned one more, BA.2.1 point something, and they were mentioning those are the most likely to be able to take over the world, with 2.75 and BQ.1.1 most likely having the greatest likelihood. Okay, so check out this beautiful waterfall behind me, and however, if you look at the graph where they map on the x-axis, they map a variety of these different variants, and on the y-axis, they show the actual, say, the successful energetic interaction between the variants and the receptor. Then what you see is that historically these variants were getting very good at increasing that interaction, but lately the increase in that interaction is getting smaller. So while the virus is still capable of evolving to become more and more infectious and dodging more neutralizing antibodies, it seems that it's running out of maybe room, because that interaction improvement is not as obvious and dominant as it was seen in as they were able to show with previous variants. So I thought that was interesting. Why? Because as I'll be talking about right away in the video, is that the concept that this virus might be slowly evolving as well to become more pathogenic, which is something we also discussed before. All right, so stay till the end of the video to find out whether they actually were correct or not, because as I mentioned, I've been a little bit late with this paper, and their predictions normally come true about a month or 2 months after they make the predictions. So as a consequence, we already know to some degree whether their predictions are true or not. Okay, so and we're going to look at CDC data, latest CDC data, to see whether they nailed yet another successful prediction in terms of what variant might be taking over. But let's move on to the next publication. And this publication, the authors did something very different. It was very cool. What they did is they analyzed different variants for their ability to dodge neutralizing antibodies. And what they did is they looked at pseudoviruses where they were able to insert any spike protein variant they wanted and see how well the antibodies might or might not neutralize those pseudoviruses with different variants. I discussed this concept of how that works in one of my previous videos, so please check it out so you can understand how this test actually works. But literally, you're just trying to check, hey, can the antibodies prevent this virus from infecting cells via the spike protein interaction with the ACE2 receptor? And they tested something like 50 different spike protein variants. So they analyzed everything under the sun that is currently going on throughout the pandemic, in terms of the variants that are now affecting our pandemic. And here's what they mentioned: of all the different variants that they tested, the ones that are most likely to dodge the antibodies. Okay, good. Mic's still on. The ones that are still most likely to dodge the antibodies were BA.4.6.3, I believe. This is from memory, so I messed this up. BQ.1.1.10, so related to BQ.1.1. And XBB, a new kid on the block. And they mentioned another one, and that was something like CH1.0 or something like that. It was like or CE 1.0. I can't remember. The first one I'm hearing of that one myself. And but what was really interesting, they also mentioned which of these variants were best at dodging antibodies that are used for treatment. And the best ones that use those monoclonal treatment antibodies were BQ.1.1, the same one mentioned in the previous publication I just talked about, and XBB. So here we go, we got a repetition of this information. But this is something, these authors did something else. They also mentioned, hey, look what's happening with all the variants around the world right now. They are starting to have common mutations among them. Check out all the little kids' fingerprints there. So they have common mutations, and what that means is that this is referred to as convergent evolution. So the viruses around the world, they're evolving in such a way so that they're starting to exhibit similar mutations amongst them. Hence the name convergent evolution, because they're all showing same pattern. Now, why is that happening? And these authors claim this is likely because imprinting, what it's causing that the antibodies that are being produced, less and less of them can neutralize the virus as virus is mutating, and as a consequence you have more and more non-neutralizing antibodies, and these non-neutralizing antibodies are then driving the evolution of the virus further towards these convergent mutations. So the virus almost is capable of now pushing its own evolution, and this is because as the virus mutated, it no longer reactivates the B memory cells, which are the cells that are responsible for production of antibodies. So you actually have a shift in what kind of antibodies you produce as a consequence of different infections. So this is kind of one of the reasons why you have this waning effects of antibodies. That might be the reason why you have this waning effect of antibodies, and at the same time why you have this constantly ongoing evolution of the virus, unimpeded evolution of the virus. But they did something else. They also were able to prove it, because besides not only testing which variants are dodging the antibodies, what they also did is they looked at the antibodies and they looked at what areas of spike proteins different antibodies isolated from patients infected by various different variants were what areas of spike proteins these antibodies were able to bind to. Now, the area that the antibody binds to the spike protein, that area of contact is referred to as epitope. So they were able to basically start measuring epitopes of these that the antibodies target. And what they were able to show, excuse me for a moment, I needed to jump. There was a step behind me, and what they're able to show is that the antibodies are converging in a specific direction in terms of their epitopes. So the epitopes of interest that they're specifically focused on was only shown to be present at only maybe approximately 30% of antibodies that were produced as a consequence of infection by the very original variant, the wild type variant that started the pandemic. Okay, but as you move forward with different infections by different variants, for example, BA.2 and BA.1, those antibodies exhibiting those epitopes was already increased to about 50%. Okay, and then BA.5, the last one they were analyzing, those antibodies expressing these specific epitopes increased to 60%. So it clearly shows you how the virus is evolving to change its epitopes, and as a consequence, the infection is producing more and more antibodies that are no longer effective against the virus. And And yeah, I thought that was super interesting. So now we have multiple viruses that have been mentioned as a potential future variants that might take over the world based on these two studies. All right, so we're going to move on to the third study. And in this third study, what the authors did is they looked at what they referred to as relative effectiveness reproduction number of the virus. It's a mouthful. Basically, it refers to is how effective the virus is at its growth and being able to reproduce. And what they were able, these authors mentioned, is like, hey, look, you have these convergent mutations happening, and they pointed out that amongst all of the different variants around the world, you have approximately 5 of these mutations shown by all of these different variants. And if you look at all of the different variants that have these 5 different mutations, those 5 mutations account at the moment for approximately 80% of all of that reproduction number effectiveness of the virus. So they're very, very powerful mutations, and it might explain why you see this convergent evolution around the world. And BQ.1.1 has all of them, all 5 of them. So as a consequence, it has the best reproduction number demonstrated based on their modeling. I have to mention that this is they're modeling that information, and as a consequence, they think this virus is likely to take over the world, and it gained that. The BQ.1.1 gained that based on its ability to in an additive manner. So the evolution was like it kept adding these convergent mutations, and BQ.1.1 happens to have all of them. Now on top of that, they also showed that the BQ.1.1 also happens to bind to ACE2 receptor more effectively than prior variants, as well as it's more fusogenic than BA.5. So why that's important is because clearly what we're seeing is a pattern. I mentioned this in previous videos as well. We're seeing a pattern where the virus is becoming slowly more and more fusogenic, and fusogenicity leads to formation of syncytia. This is where the virus is capable of fusing our own cells together into like a blob. And we do know that I'm laughing at the word blob because that's not a scientific term. And we do know that actually syncytia is correlated to the severity of the disease. So this is an unwelcome trend, because we're seeing that with each Omicron variant, they are becoming more and more pathogenic. However, when they infected hamsters, they were able to show that BQ.1.1 was actually not as pathogenic as, say, BA.5. And we do know that pathogenicity in hamsters, these authors showed this previously, correlates to fusogenicity as well inside the hamsters. So why is BQ.1.1 showing that it might be more fusogenic, more pathogenic in lab tests, but is not as pathogenic in hamsters as prior variants? Well, they mentioned that it could be because maybe other mutations are preventing the pathogenicity, and indeed BQ.1.1 has other mutations and other genes besides the spike protein. So the spike protein might be more fusogenic and more dangerous, but the evolution is happening in the entire genome of the virus. Nevertheless, these authors come to conclusion that BQ.1.1 will take over. They will be the next variant to take over. Okay, then last paper I wanted to mention is to bring back the BA.2.75 variant. This is the variant that actually was discovered, I believe, in India, and was growing in India. And the authors of the paper that analyzed that variant, they were able to show that variant also happens to be better at binding ACE2 receptor than its predecessor BA.2, as well as it is also more fusogenic than its predecessor BA.2. So once again, we're seeing that as the virus evolves, at the moment it appears that it is also evolving to become more and more pathogenic. Not a welcome trend, because obviously that might eventually result, who knows, hopefully not. Maybe our collective immunity will be protecting us, but it might result in worse disease outcomes in the future if this pattern continues. Hence, I wanted to bring it up. All right, this brings me to finally the end. The last data I wanted to show you is the latest data from American CDC to see, hey, are these predictions, how accurate they are? And the latest data from CDC clearly shows that the variants that are currently taking over the US is BQ.1.1. So the very first authors I mentioned again, they got it right for the fourth time. The other variant, the second most dominant variant in the US right now is BQ.1. And the third one, which the authors of the very first paper I mentioned, my favorite, who are keep predicting everything, they never analyzed that one, is XBB. In the last couple of weeks, XBB, 3 weeks or so, XBB is quickly ramping up as well. So it will be interesting to see how the race between the XBB variant and BQ.1.1, how that pans out, basically. But those are the latest variants. So right now, 2.75 and its subvariants are nowhere to be seen. They're in a minority, although who knows, because every single variant that has ever taken over has always started as a tiny minority variant that is barely detectable, and then when the opportunity arrives, it takes over. So we'll see what happens. All right, everyone, this is going to bring me to the end of this video. I hope you enjoyed the walk through this beautiful canyon with me. I wanted to say thank you, everyone, for supporting the channel. Please continue sharing these videos because it's how I grow, obviously. And thank you for all the questions. I look forward to seeing some of you at the upcoming COVID Q&A events, where I will be actually answering some of these questions. And those are also open mic events, so you can ask questions as well. We're constantly nonstop learning more and more stuff. And hey, hopefully we'll be able to make more of these videos about how to predict pandemic in the future, because I actually think these are very important. And unfortunately, our governments or health authorities are not doing it at all. Some scientists are doing it, but very, very few. I brought up the latest assortment I was able to find in this video, but I think it's super important because this is how it allows us to understand how we should be managing the pandemic, is through being able to predict what will the management do to the future of the pandemic. So, and the last thing, please stay healthy and stay well, and if you can, protect your immune system by being outdoors as much as you can. That's at least my mantra, that's for sure. And let's see if I came to the last part of the canyon, which will require me to slide down without harming myself. So bye, everyone. I'll say bye now, but let's see if I can continue filming. Whoa, yeah. Ah, that's right. No broken legs. Bye, everyone.